January 5, 1997, in Rosemary Pacenti. A 64-year-old schoolteacher was enjoying her day off, having a cozy evening in her 23rd floor apartment in the Bronx in New York City, USA. Sadly, she had no idea what awaited her next. The next day, on January 6, 1997, one of Rosemary's neighbors noticed that the lights in Rosemary's apartment had been on since the previous night. In the evening, she decided to go and check on Rosemary. What she discovered when she walked into the apartment was something that would haunt her for life. The cold, lifeless body of Rosemary Pacenti lay in the kitchen of her apartment. Looking at the bloody scene, the neighbor collapsed to the floor, sobbing before contacting the authorities. Who could have done something so horrible to a simple elderly school teacher? What could have been the motive behind this ruthless murder? Rosemary Pacenti was born on July 28, 1932. Although not much is known about Rosemary's early life, it is certain that she never married anyone. For most of her life, Rosemary was the kind of woman who minded her own business and mostly kept to herself. In 1972, she moved to 140 Alcott Place, an apartment in Co-op City in the Bronx. For the next 25 years, she lived there alone, all by herself, and worked as a school teacher. Although she led quite a monotonous life, she would often step out to spend time with a few of her neighbors she had befriended in the building. Sunday, January 5, 1997, was quite a cold day in the Bronx, and Rosemary decided to stay in. The night passed, and on Monday morning, January 6, 1997, Rosemary never showed up at the school where she worked. Her phone rang multiple times, disrupting the pin-drop silence in her apartment, but there was no answer. One of Rosemary's neighbors noticed something odd. The lights in Rosemary's apartment had stayed on through the night. However, she didn't put much thought into it. But when she tried calling Rosemary and got no answer throughout the day, she grew concerned. And then in the evening at 6:15 p.m., the neighbor decided to check up on Rosemary and went to her apartment. From the moment she arrived at Rosemary's apartment door, she had an eerie feeling. The door to the apartment had been left slightly open. She walked in slowly, taking small steps, afraid of what she might find. The neighbor's worst fears came true as soon as she walked into the kitchen and discovered Rosemary's body in a pool of blood. She shrieked, looking at the gruesome scene, and tried to pull herself together. She informed the authorities immediately, and soon Detective George Wood and Sergeant Curtis Oates from the New York Police Department arrived to inspect the crime scene. Rosemary's body was almost completely covered in blood. She was lying face down with a 9-inch knife still lodged in her back. Looking at the multiple stab wounds on Rosemary's body, the detectives could tell that she had suffered an extremely painful death. Detectives also noticed that Rosemary's throat had been slit, and the defense wounds suggested that Rosemary had put up a fight against her attacker during the struggle between the two. Outside the apartment in the lobby, there was more evidence that supported their theory. Detectives found stains of blood smeared across the wall next to the elevator. However, there were no traces of blood inside the elevator. This led the detectives to search the staircase of the building, and on the 10th floor across a flight of stairs there was another trail of blood. Detectives now believed that sometime during the struggle Rosemary had managed to wound her attacker. Detectives were sure that the blood found smeared across the elevator wall and on the staircase 13 floors below Rosemary's apartment belonged to the person who killed Rosemary. This gave detectives an idea of how Rosemary's killer might have escaped the building. At first they thought he took the elevator and pressed the button with his blood-covered hands and left a trail on the wall. But perhaps the elevator was taking too long. Or maybe he thought that given his messy appearance, someone in the elevator might suspect him. He then thought it would be best to take the stairs if he wanted to leave the building without being noticed. And that was what he did. While the bloodstains were a strong piece of evidence in the case, they didn't give detectives an idea of who the killer might be. The samples were obtained and preserved for further testing and future use. Later, an autopsy confirmed that Rosemary had been stabbed a total of 39 times, of which 8 wounds were on her back. The knife found jammed in Rosemary's back belonged to a set from her own kitchen. This made the detectives believe that Rosemary's murder was probably not a premeditated one. They came up with the theory that when the attacker entered Rosemary's apartment, he initially didn't have any intention of killing her. But when a struggle ensued, he did it anyway. And since there were some items missing from the apartment, it seemed like robbery was the motive behind the tragic incident. A few days after the murder, a funeral was held for Rosemary at Granby Cemetery, Granby, Hartford County, Connecticut, USA. Her loved ones gathered around to pay their respects, and she was laid to rest. Weeks and months went by, but there weren't any new developments in the case. Even with strong evidence and convincing theories, detectives were having a hard time coming up with any leads to follow. Soon the police department diverted their attention to a fresh trail of murders in New York, and Rosemary's case went cold. More than 2 years later, in May 1999, Detective Kevin Lawler from the NYPD was assigned to the cold case squad and handed Rosemary's case. Scheming through Rosemary's case file, he had an idea of how he was going to move forward with the case. With assistance from Detective Mark Tebbins, Detective Lawler got the blood samples found on the elevator wall and in the staircase re-examined. The forensics department was successful in developing a DNA profile of Rosemary's killer, and it was uploaded to the Combined DNA Index System, or simply CODIS, which is a nationwide database of DNA profiles. All the detectives needed to do now was wait and hope for a match. After another 2 years, on August 20th, 2001, Detective Lawler received a phone call from the NYPD crime lab regarding Rosemary's case. There finally was a match through CODIS, and the person was identified as 28-year-old Charles Jones. Detective Lawler had been desperately awaiting this call, and now that he had the information he needed, he wasted no time in investigating the genetic link further. In order to make sure that he wasn't missing anything, he performed a background check on Jones and uncovered some intriguing information. Originally, Jones wasn't linked to Rosemary's murder, but since he had been imprisoned after pleading guilty to a robbery and assault of another Co-op City resident on August 13, 1998, he was required to submit a DNA sample right before being released on August 10, 2001. And then on August 20, 2001, when Jones's DNA profile was uploaded to CODIS, it matched the sample that belonged to Rosemary's killer. Furthermore, at the time of Rosemary's murder, Jones himself lived in Co-op City, just a couple of blocks from her apartment. While this strengthened the evidence against Jones, it still wasn't enough for Detective Lawler to charge Jones yet. Detective Lawler was quick to realize that while the blood sample evidence did place Charles Jones in the building at the time of the murder, it did not place him in any way inside Rosemary's apartment where the murder took place. This could completely destroy the detective's theory of Rosemary's murder and give Jones a chance to escape. Detective Lawler and Detective Tebbins needed more information and stronger evidence to put Jones behind bars. They decided to head over to Jones' house and have a talk with him. When the detectives arrived at Jones' place, they were told that he wasn't home at the time and that they should come back later. Since they didn't have solid evidence against Jones yet, they had to be extremely careful about the case, as even a slight misstep could cause all their progress to be lost. They didn't want anyone in Jones's family to learn about the reason behind their visit, which could tip him off and give him another chance to escape. And so they left a message for Jones saying that he had an outstanding traffic violation and they only wanted to talk to him to clear it. The detectives had to leave Jones's house without seeing him, but not without setting up a trap for him. A couple of days later, Jones took the bait and showed up to the precinct to talk about his traffic violation. The next steps were going to be very crucial, as Jones would soon be made aware of the real reason he was called in for questioning. Detectives wanted to create a comfy environment for Jones before confronting him. After 30 minutes of being nice to Jones, the detectives began the interrogation. Even though Jones seemed nervous, he still wasn't breaking, and so detectives threw in some facts to shake his confidence. They told him that the blood found in the building of Rosemary's apartment belonged to him, and that was enough evidence to link him to Rosemary's murder. Listening to this information, Jones changed his story. The process still didn't seem like it was working. Detective Lawler had to do something more to break Jones and get a clear confession out of him. He walked up to his desk, picked up an envelope, and pulled out a bunch of pictures and laid them on the table in front of Jones. The pictures showed Rosemary's body lying cold and lifeless on her kitchen floor. Detective Lawler thought this might drive Jones into admitting his guilt, but he was wrong. The tensions were now high, even after several attempts at making him speak the truth. But the detectives were not letting him go anywhere. The interrogation went on for another 8 hours and only came to an end when Jones finally gave in. He decided to confess to the murder and cut a deal for his plea bargain. By stating a straight 8, Jones meant that he would serve only 8 years in prison for a full confession of the murder. By now Jones had realized that there was no way out of this mess. One way or another he would have to give in and suffer the damage for his actions. But thankfully Jones chose wisely. Instead of contesting the accusations against him, he gave Detective Lawler a full confession hoping that it would help him during his sentencing. According to Jones, the whole incident was merely a misunderstanding. He was persistent that Rosemary attacked him first, and he only acted in self-defense. However, something about this confession wasn't sitting well with the detectives. At the time of the murder, Jones was 23 years old, almost 6 feet tall. A well-built tall man defending himself from a 5'4" elderly woman seemed like a made-up story. While it did seem like this wasn't a premeditated murder, the detectives weren't fully on board with the idea that Jones acted in self-defense. Charles Jones was arrested on Friday, August 24, 2001, and charged with robbery and the murder of Rosemary Pacenti. Jones was made aware that if he contested the accusations against him in court and lost, it would end in a lengthy murder trial with a possible death penalty as the outcome. On the morning of January 11, 2002, in the Bronx County Courthouse, Jones pleaded guilty to a charge of first-degree manslaughter and was handed a sentence of 19 years behind bars. Charles Jones' capture brought closure to many of the Bronx residents, but especially to Rosemary's loving neighbors. Even though their friend was long gone, she would never be forgotten. Rosemary's case being solved brought a huge amount of relief to her family and friends. Belinda Bailey, one of Rosemary's neighbors and friends, said that her friend's murder remained a mystery for almost 4 years, and those 4 years were the most painful for her. She lived right down the hall from Rosemary's apartment, and whenever she passed it, she would think of her, even though it took some time. The detectives were able to solve Rosemary's case through DNA technology and bring closure to her loved ones. Detectives are now determined to implement the same technology to crack thousands of other cold cases and serve justice to victims like Rosemary and their families. Jones's confession told a different story from what the detectives had theorized. Do you think he was hiding the whole truth or not? On the morning of August 3, 2007, the day started off bright and sunny for Daniel Burrows, a 61-year-old resident of Mays Landing, New Jersey, along with his 45-year-old wife, Loretta, and other community members. Daniel and Loretta had been married for several years, but things took an unexpected turn that afternoon. Loretta spotted Daniel in the company of a blonde girl, driving a yellow Hummer with 4 of the license plates. Naturally, she was taken aback and confronted Daniel about the situation. To her shock, Daniel confessed that he was leaving her for the younger lady. Unfortunately, that was the last time anyone saw Daniel. Many questions soon arise. What happened to Daniel? Did he simply elope with the younger woman? Or is there a more troubling reason behind his sudden change in behavior and subsequent disappearance? Mays Landing, located within Hamilton Township in Atlantic County, New Jersey, is an unincorporated community and census-designated place. According to the 2010 U.S. Census, the population of Mays Landing was recorded at 2,135 individuals. Notably, it serves as the county seat of Atlantic County, which is situated along the Jersey Shore. As of the 2020 census, Atlantic County ranks as the state's 15th most populous county. Mays Landing is renowned for the popular Balick Winery, one of the largest wine producers in the state. The residents of this community are known for their easygoing and cheerful nature. In 2007, the crime rate in Mays Landing stood at 329 incidents per 100,000 people, significantly lower than the national average of 472. This is the very community where Daniel Burrows and his wife resided. Daniel Burrows, born on November 6, 1946 in Sheldon, Texas, was raised in the heart of Delaware County, Pennsylvania, alongside his sister, Jean Burrows Gallagher. Due to certain circumstances, they later moved to New Jersey where his mother, Louise Floria Wuntersick, remarried Raymond J. Wuntersick. Daniel's half-brother, Raymond J. Wontersick III, quickly became his closest companion. From a young age, Daniel displayed an extraordinary talent for craftsmanship, with his hands possessing a magical touch. His skills ranged from custom automotive paintwork to home construction. Although he did not have a conventional job, his knack for car repairs and renovations kept him occupied and satisfied. In 1960, Daniel attended high school where he crossed paths with Loretta Doyle, his high school sweetheart. They experienced the highs and lows of teenage love, but their relationship was not particularly serious during that time. Unexpectedly, they went their separate ways after graduation and lost contact for many years. Both Daniel and Loretta moved on and married different individuals. However, they both went through divorces in 1970. Unfortunately, Loretta's second husband passed away in February 1994. Shortly after reconnecting, Loretta and Daniel's bond reunited, and they began dating once again. After 3 years of dating, the high school sweethearts decided to get married in 1997. They settled in Mays Landing, New Jersey, and everything seemed blissful. They blended their families with children from their previous marriages, and Loretta even had 4 grandchildren. Daniel was a devoted father to his 2 children, Carolyn and Danny Jr., and a loving grandfather to Amanda Costa. However, their marriage was not as uncomplicated as it appeared. Over time, challenges arose beneath the surface of their seemingly smooth relationship. On August 3, 2007, mysteriously vanished from their home. Loretta recounted that Daniel had departed with a younger blonde woman in a yellow Hummer. As per her account, the woman was a waitress from Florida whom they had encountered during their vacation at a restaurant. Daniel developed a strong liking for the place, resulting in them dining there almost every day of their vacation. Upon their return home, Loretta embarked on another vacation with her daughter's family. Upon her return, she was taken aback to find Daniel in their driveway with the woman from Florida. While she was still trying to comprehend the situation, Daniel announced his intention to go to Florida, the Sunshine State, with her. Loretta insisted that Daniel had always desired to relocate and retire in Florida, a plan she opposed due to the proximity of her grandchildren. Their conflicting views on retirement plans strained their relationship. Following Daniel's sudden move, Loretta was devastated and sought revenge. She contemplated selling their house, but since the property was jointly owned by Daniel and Loretta, she could not do so without divorcing him. Instead, she organized a yard sale to dispose of Daniel's belongings. Unsurprisingly, this action infuriated and aroused suspicion among Daniel's friends and family. Robert Valiant, Jr., Daniel's close friend, was perplexed as he knew Daniel cherished his tools for his projects, making it unusual for him to abandon them. Robert confronted Loretta about the yard sale and the abandoned tools, but Loretta asserted that Daniel had no interest in keeping his old belongings and did not wish to take them to Florida. Even Daniel's brother and best friend Raymond found the situation suspicious. Daniel had not shared his new address or informed him of his move to Florida, which they would typically discuss regularly. Daniel's sudden and unexpected departure left those close to him bewildered and concerned. They felt that the narrative did not align, yet they lacked evidence to contradict Loretta's account. However, they were determined to uncover the truth about Daniel's whereabouts and the identity of the mysterious girl who caused him to vanish without a trace. On September 1, 2007, Raymond made the journey from his Pennsylvania home to visit Loretta and officially reported Daniel as missing to the police. The authorities immediately launched an investigation focusing their search on local databases, particularly in Florida, where Daniel was rumored to have gone. Unfortunately, their efforts yielded no leads or traces of Daniel's whereabouts. Throughout the investigation, the detectives conducted interviews with Loretta, who remained cooperative and forthcoming. They also thoroughly searched her house and property, but found nothing suspicious or out of place. As they delved deeper into Loretta's background, the detectives stumbled upon a past embezzlement case. It came to light that Loretta had embezzled a substantial sum of money, approximately $500,000, from her previous workplace nearly a decade ago. This resulted in a 15-month federal prison sentence prior to her marriage to Daniel in 1997. When confronted with the evidence, Loretta claimed that she had been unfairly targeted by her company, and that others were involved in the embezzlement as well. She admitted that she had kept this secret from Daniel out of fear. Surprisingly, it was revealed that Daniel had visited Loretta regularly during her time in prison, but she had not been entirely honest with him about the reason for her incarceration. Ronald Roberts, Daniel's friend and neighbor, also provided some concerning information to the investigators. He noticed dirt on Loretta's hands and clothing during their interactions and detected a foul odor, which she attributed to a dead animal. Additionally, he observed that a broken trellis had recently been repaired. Despite these suspicions, Loretta always had an explanation ready, frustratingly leaving the police without concrete evidence to make an arrest. As time passed, Daniel's case gradually grew colder, leaving his loved ones desperate for answers. In February 2009, Loretta took a significant step in her life by initiating divorce proceedings against Daniel. After enough time had passed, she believed it was justified to end their marriage and sell their house. To formalize the process, a notice was published in the newspaper. However, when the court hearing arrived, Daniel was nowhere to be found. Loretta's plan was to sell their house in Mays Landing and move to Ventmouth City to be closer to her daughter and sister. In February 2010, Daniel Burrows' family successfully convinced investigators to reopen the case after a local police established a cold case unit in the county. The family also created a Facebook page called Find Daniel Burrows to gather information. In the page's About section, Raymond, Daniel's brother, expressed suspicion towards Loretta's claim Daniel had left with another woman, leaving all his belongings behind. This raised doubts about Loretta's account of events. The case took an unexpected turn in February 2013 when Raymond, frustrated with the lack of progress, contacted the police. He believed that Loretta might be responsible for Daniel's disappearance and hinted that he might be deceased. Loretta was shocked by the accusations of her involvement in her husband's possible death. She maintained that Daniel had simply run away with a younger woman, but without concrete evidence to support either claim, the police were at a standstill. However, Raymond was determined to uncover the truth. He urged the detectives to investigate the suspicious death of Loretta's first husband. There were suspicions among both family members and friends that Loretta had played a role in his demise. The circumstances leading to his death were troubling. After a period of separation, Loretta and her former husband rekindled their relationship for about a week before tragedy struck, and he tragically overdosed. What deepened the suspicions even further was the fact that Loretta had been responsible for administering his medications during this period. Adding to the concerns, the police discovered that Loretta had received a substantial amount of money following his death. However, to everyone's surprise, she did not share any portion of it with his children. This raised red flags and strengthened the belief that something was amiss regarding the circumstances surrounding his death. Authorities began to suspect that Loretta's involvement went beyond what initially appeared. The similarities to Daniel's case only heightened their suspicions. However, despite their growing doubts, the police knew that without Daniel's body, they couldn't build a murder case. Nevertheless, they did stumble upon a potentially significant piece of evidence, a power of attorney document signed by Daniel. Upon closer examination, this document seems suspiciously fake. It had been created on June 12, 2007, and had been legalized by an acquaintance of Loretta's, raising even more questions about the events surrounding Daniel's disappearance. It became evident that Loretta's primary motive was the valuable house, which was worth a substantial amount of money, and she was desperate to cash out. Investigators realized that there was more to this case than initially met the eye, and they were determined to uncover the truth about what had truly happened to Daniel. In the early morning of May 17, 2013, the investigators, led by Sergeant Lynn Doherty of the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office, obtained search warrants for both Loretta's house and the residence where she had been staying with her sister. The search warrants were executed simultaneously, leaving Loretta with no opportunity to tamper with or destroy any potential evidence. Loretta seemed to have an inkling as to why the police were there, as she anxiously inquired if they were planning to search her house in Ventmouth City upon their arrival. Detective Caroline McDonald stumbled upon an eerie finding while scouring one of the bedrooms in Ventmouth City. To her surprise, she discovered a collection of sizable Tupperware containers meticulously arranged and hidden within the closet. Curiously, these containers were the sole items in the house organized in such a manner. Adding to the peculiarity, air freshener beads and dryer sheets were placed atop these containers. However, the moment the containers were opened, a nauseating odor of decay permeated the air, sending shivers down their spines. To their utmost horror, investigators uncovered bones that had been painstakingly separated into 2 containers, along with a concealed skull nestled within a woman's handbag. Loretta was subsequently apprehended and brought in for interrogation at the police station. In a state of distress, she tearfully admitted to the murder of Daniel and disclosed that his remains were concealed within the closet of her Ventnor residence. However, Loretta presented a narrative of domestic violence, asserting that she had acted in self-defense. According to her account, a heated argument ensued between them, prompting her to retreat to the kitchen and retrieve a knife. Loretta alleged that Daniel aggressively lunged at her, resulting in an accidental impalement with the knife. After the incident, she confessed to placing Daniel's lifeless body in the bathtub. When questioned by detectives about her failure to immediately contact emergency services, Loretta provided a disturbing explanation. She revealed that she had left Daniel's body in the bathtub and proceeded to embark on a vacation. Upon her return, she detailed how she relocated his remains into containers. Notably, Loretta admitted to exhuming and carrying these containers with her whenever she moved. The tragic truth surrounding Daniel Burrows was finally unveiled. Loretta faced charges of murder and obstructing her arrest. During the court proceedings, Loretta initially displayed minimal emotion, but as the testimonies unfolded, she broke down and began weeping. The testimonies commenced with Dr. Charles F. Sebert Jr., a forensic pathologist who had opened the containers. Dr. Charles testified that the containers were enveloped in 9 layers of plastic bags meticulously arranged in alternating directions. He also observed the presence of dryer sheets, air fresheners, and scented beads evidently used to mask the scent of decomposition. Upon opening the first container, Dr. Charles discovered a woman's handbag, its color altered by the fluids of decomposition. Inside the bag, he uncovered a cranium, mandible, skull, and jawbone. The second, larger plastic container contained additional skeletal remains, including the left upper arm and lower legs. Upon examining the remains, Dr. Charles observed incisions on the ribs that were consistent with stat wounds. This led him to conclude that the individual had met a violent end, confirming a case of homicide. Following Dr. Charles's testimony, Dr. Stuart Alexander, a forensic odontologist, took the stand and positively identified the remains in the plastic tote as belonging to Daniel Burrows. He compared Burrows' dental records to the teeth found in the skull, providing further evidence of identification. Donna Fontana, a forensic anthropologist from the New Jersey State Police, also provided testimony regarding the condition of the bones within the boxes. To visually demonstrate the state of the bones, Fontana utilized a replica of a human skeleton and accompanying photographs, offering a clear visual aid for the jury. She specifically highlighted the right tibia, a significant bone in the lower leg, which exhibited distinct signs of being cut with a knife and saw. The consistent color of the cut edge with the bone indicated that the cut had occurred around the time of death. Additionally, Fontana observed that several ribs were missing, and those that displayed trauma showed injuries consistent with knife wounds, with one rib being completely fractured. Fontana emphasized that this pattern of dismemberment is often employed to hinder identification and facilitate transportation. On August 3, 2007, Daniel disappeared, with Loretta claiming he had left for a younger woman in a yellow Hummer. However, the prosecution believed that Loretta had orchestrated his murder. In early June 2007, Loretta approached Warware in Edinburgh and requested a power of attorney to be drafted, claiming that she and her husband were selling their home while he was away. Grateful for Loretta's kindness, Heiberg agreed to do it for free. Loretta then sought the assistance of Edward Dwyer to notarize the power of attorney, which she signed in her husband's name without his consent. Loretta's daughter, Nicole de Dimigio, witnessed this act of forgery. After Daniel's death, Loretta utilized the fraudulent document to sell their home for $77,000, with half of the proceeds belonging to Daniel. To gain access to the funds, she initiated a divorce in February 2009, alleging that Daniel had relocated to Florida without providing an address. Her divorce lawyer, Daniel also from, published a notice of the complaint in the press of Atlantic City. During the divorce proceedings, Loretta received half of the money, with the remaining amount granted upon finalization. The prosecutor highlighted that Loretta acquired nearly $100,000, including the proceeds from the sale of Daniel's house and belongings. In his closing statement, Levis emphasized that Loretta had evaded justice for over 8 years, leaving behind only Daniel's remains. The narrative concludes with Loretta becoming $100,000 wealthier and concealing Daniel Burrows in her closet. Following 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Loretta Burrows guilty of first-degree murder for fatally stabbing her husband, dismembering his body with a knife and saw, packing it into 2 plastic containers, and dragging it with her as she relocated 3 times within 6 years. On March 17, 2015, Loretta was convicted and sentenced to 55 years in prison, with an additional 3 years added for hindering apprehension. She will be eligible for parole in 2060 when she reaches 108 years old. After receiving her sentence, Loretta broke down in court and expressed her hope that her actions would bring some form of peace to those who had been harmed. Currently, Loretta is incarcerated at the Edna Mahone Correctional Facility for Women in Clinton, New Jersey, where she is expected to remain until her death. Raymond Wuntersik experienced a mix of emotions following the conviction of his half-brother's murderer. Raymond had fought for a trial since Daniel's remains were discovered in May of 2013. He wanted the jurors to witness the gruesome evidence of what Loretta had done to Daniel. Raymond stated, "It was my brother who brought justice to this case. He brought justice to himself. His horribly mutilated body won the case." Raymond compared Loretta's actions to those of a butcher slaughtering an animal, emphasizing that Daniel was not an animal, but a kind and gentle person who never caused harm to anyone. Loretta's emotional display in court, coupled with her insinuations of abuse by Daniel, were met with skepticism and dismissal from Raymond and other family members. They believed her tears were fake and her claims were false, suggesting that she only cried because she knew she would spend the rest of her life in prison after being caught. Robert Valiant Sr., a friend of Daniel's, expressed this sentiment. Carolyn Burrows, Daniel's sister, was both outraged and bewildered by Loretta's behavior. She revealed that Loretta had attempted to sell Daniel's belongings shortly after his disappearance and had even advised people not to worry about him. Carolyn questioned how Loretta could have kept Daniel hidden in her closet while moving him from house to house. Assistant Atlantic County Prosecutor Kathleen Bond described Loretta's actions as unimaginable, resembling scenes from nightmares and horror movies. Bond highlighted that Loretta not only brutally stabbed her husband to death, but also dismembered his body with a serrated knife, leaving it to decompose for 6 years. At the time of this video's release, there were no updates on the investigation into the death of Loretta's first husband. Daniel Burrows' story serves as a reminder to persistently advocate for what we believe in. The determination and advocacy displayed by Daniel's family, including the creation of a Facebook page and their push for reinvestigation, ultimately led to the uncovering of the truth. This case exemplifies the power of seeking justice and the importance of persistence. Regarding whether justice was served for Daniel Burrows and whether Loretta's sentence was appropriate or she should have received the death penalty, that is a matter of personal opinion. A young woman vanished from sight after pulling into the school's parking lot to attend a sporting event. Soon, everyone was in for very unsettling discovery, and the police were called in to investigate. Detectives worked on this eerie mystery for a total of 28 years, and none of them had any idea that this would be the first case of its kind. On June 12, 1975, Sarah Yarborough was born in Portland. Her parents relocated to the town of Federal Way in another state not too long after. It is practically a suburb of Seattle and is located close to it. Along with having 2 brothers, Sarah was very close to her younger brother and assisted her parents in caring for him. Sarah had a background in ballet and music from a young age. The girl always wanted to get into a reputable college, so she worked hard in school. She took part in the school program and flew twice to New Zealand because of her academic performance. Sarah afterwards joined the cheerleading squad at her school. She was a compassionate and non-judgmental individual who tried to assist anyone in need, and she had a large number of friends. When Sarah was 16 years old, her cheerleading squad got together for an event on Saturday morning, December 14th, 1991. They were all together at the school building, waiting for the bus to come get them. Sarah was the only one who misjudged the time when she drove to school in her father's car. The bus was not supposed to arrive until 9 in the morning, but she mistakenly believed it would pick them up at 8. Gradually, all of her friends began to show up, but none of them noticed Sarah. When the bus carrying the students arrived, some of the students noticed a car in the parking lot, but the young woman was not there. While her friends found this odd, nobody was able to get in touch with Sarah because none of them had cell phones at the time. 2 boys, age 12, were strolling around the school premises at approximately the same moment. They saw a strange man as they strolled through the wood area behind the school tennis courts. He emerged from behind some bushes, gave them a strange look, and turned to leave. The kids think he is strange, but they ignored him and continued on. A startling scene was waiting for them a short distance away. A young woman, lifeless and lying on the ground. The school children ran home to tell their parents they thought she had died. The father of one of the boys chose to follow the suspicious man that the kids had spotted, while the parents of the other boy accompanied him to the location. His son informed him that he witnessed a vehicle that appeared to be a Chevrolet Nova leaving that location. His father made the decision to go outside and attempt to locate that car because he lived close to the school. He was able to locate a car that looked similar at one point, but it vanished from his view quickly, making it impossible for him to locate it again. The parents of the other boy arrived at the school in the meantime and saw that the girl on the ground was most likely dead. They hurried to the school building right away and dialed 911. When the police arrived, they were able to confirm that the young lady had passed away. It did not take them long to ascertain that Sarah was the deceased. The officers deduced that the victim had most likely been strangled based on the marks on her neck. There were only a few of her possessions, a jacket, underwear, and socks near the body. Officers suspect that the attacker may have attacked her right next to the car and then dragged her behind the trees because they discovered her purse and car keys inside the vehicle in the school parking lot. After transferring the body to the medical examiners, the police started searching for any hints. Interviewing everyone who was on or close to the school grounds was their initial step. The man that had emerged from behind the bushes close to Sarah's body was roughly described by the 2 guys who discovered her. They described him as a tall man in his early 20s, dressed in black pants, a dark raincoat, and shoulder-length blonde hair. The police soon located another witness, and when they did, they discovered an extremely shocking tale. In the same forested area, a man going for a jog came upon an odd sight. The witness believed that a couple had simply chosen to have some privacy as the young woman lay motionless next to the bushes with a man hovering over her. The man and the young woman were still there when he ran the opposite way down the same road a short while later. He did not feel that he was witnessing a crime being committed in either of the 2 instances. The witness himself told the police that he did not know what behavior was typical in his new country because he had just recently immigrated to the United States from another culture. Still, the witness gave the police a general description of the murderer that matched the kid's story of how the body was found. Several dozen more people who had been in the vicinity of the school were questioned by detectives, but no more pertinent leads were discovered. Meanwhile, doctors examined Sarah's body and determined that her death was caused by strangulation. It appears that the offender used her own underwear and the young lady's head has sustained a significant injury. Assuming that the victim lost consciousness from this below, the experts concluded that the story of the runner was true. He noticed that the young lady on the ground remained motionless. Upon examining Sarah's clothing, forensic investigators discovered remnants of the same male DNA on nearly every article. However, in 1991, there was no shared DNA database, so the only method the investigators had was to compare the DNA samples of particular suspects directly. An additional detail was brought to the detectives' notice. The medical examiner reported that there were no indications of assault on Sarah's body, despite the fact that forensic scientists discovered male DNA residue on her clothing. After obtaining all of this data, investigators developed their own theories about what transpired. Sarah was the only one in the parking lot when she arrived at the school nearly an hour early. Sarah's attacker most likely saw her there, waited for the girl to exit the vehicle, struck her in the head with an object, and caused her to pass out. After that, he dragged her out of the parking lot and behind the trees, where her body was discovered later. After stripping off some of her clothes and abusing her, the offender strangled the victim with her own stockings. Detectives were disappointed to learn that the driver of the Chevrolet Nova, which they had searched for after one of the children who discovered Sarah's body, had informed them about the vehicle in which the perpetrator had allegedly fled the scene and actually just finished delivering donuts that morning. He gave a sample of his DNA, which did not match what was on Sarah's clothing. Seemingly, the children only noticed the vehicle traveling beside them and assumed the culprit was at the wheel. Alas, none of the boys could remember for certain whether they saw a man coming from the bushes toward any car. Police continued to look for witnesses and fresh leads over the following few days, but they did not make any noteworthy progress. Classes resumed on Monday, despite the fact that everyone was appalled by what had transpired. Not only had the murder occurred a short distance from their school, but the perpetrator was still at large and nobody knew who he was. The male athletes made plans to accompany each student to the vehicle or bus so that they would not be left on the streets since the young ladies were scared to stroll the premises by themselves. Detectives interviewed each of the roughly 70 possible witnesses they identified that morning in and around the school, but they were unable to obtain any additional information. A rough picture of the murderer was put together and sent to all of the local newspapers and television stations based on the testimony of the two children and the jogger. Numerous media outlets covered the story, and in the weeks that followed, the police received hundreds of tips. Investigators looked into each one, but they all came to a standstill. They once had a tip regarding a man with a criminal past who fit the killer's description. However, there was a setback for the detectives. His DNA did not match that of the offender. The case has been on hold for several months since then. The police attempted to follow up on each of the roughly 4,000 leads they have received in total, but their resources were simply insufficient to handle the volume of data. Time also worked against them, since new cases needed to be looked into every month while investigators looked for the offender. When Sarah's family discovered that the police did not have enough resources to handle all of the tips, her grandfather attempted to assist as much as he could. He was employed by a technology company, and he persuaded management to temporarily donate a $100,000 computer with extreme processing power to the police department. Even though it was an enormous amount in the 1990s, management approved of it. Police officers could process leads more quickly, sort them into an easy-to-read format, and store all the information about the leads in one location with this computer. In spite of everything, they were unable to follow any lead, and in the years that followed, they made no progress. Sarah's classmates graduated 2 years later, and before they did, they decided to honor their friend. They were able to raise a substantial amount of money, which they used to build a memorial. It was a bench with metal castings of Sarah's belongings on it. A picture of the young woman's doll reaching for her purse was placed next to these items. The case was repeatedly reopened in the years that followed, and all the evidence was once again examined, but the outcome remained the same. They still had not been able to apprehend the offender. The police conducted thousands of interviews and collected DNA samples from almost 300 potential suspects during this time, but their findings were all ambiguous. 20 years after the murder in 2011, the new detective made the decision to use contemporary technology. He was made aware of a business that started doing genetic genealogy research. When the policeman asked if they could try to find the relatives of the person whose DNA was found on the victim's body, the experts took up the task. Sadly, they were unsuccessful. First of all, in 2011, genetic genealogy was only beginning to gain popularity and the experts' knowledge was quite restricted. For instance, they do not know how to look for both male and female relatives in the same sample. They could only search for family ties with other men if they shared a man's DNA, and vice versa. Second, a number of laws that forbade the use of genetic data samples to find relatives of suspects presented them with yet another challenge. it did bore some interesting fruit. Firstly, the group of scientists that the investigator had contacted had already spent a number of years assembling a genetic genealogy of the original settlers who arrived in America in 1620 from Great Britain aboard the Mayflower. They learned that the assassin of Sarah was related to Robert Fuller, a passenger on the ship, through analyzing his DNA. But it was nearly impossible to track him down in this chain, particularly during those years. Although there were only a little more than 100 passengers on the ship, more than 25 million people have descended from them over the ages. Second, the detectives were unaware that he had made the Sarah Yarbrough case the first of its kind. Although his idea was not successful, it was the first crime of that was attempt to be solved using genetic genealogy. Using what information he could find, the detective located multiple men living in the town's vicinity at the time of Sarah's murder, who shared the father's surname. He found pictures of them and went up to the two men who found the body when they were kids and the jogger who was one of the witnesses. Sadly, neither of them was able to identify the murderer in the picture. At last, the investigators requested DNA samples from every Fuller in the vicinity, which they then sent to a lab. Even though none of them matched the murderer's DNA, an intriguing thing happened in this case. In fact, one of those men was a distant descendant of Robert Fuller from that very ship, as the experts proved. He was undoubtedly not the murderer, though, and he was also unaware that any distant relatives resided nearby. He might have been related to the offender so distantly that their family was unaware of the relationship. In 2017, the detective retired and a new team took up the case. Investigators returned to the company that had taken the killer's DNA sample in 2011. By then, genetic material analysis had progressed significantly and specialists decided to attempt determining the offender's ancestry. Took 2 entire years. Experts manually attempted to trace the killer's family ties and get in touch with people who were living in Federal Way at the time of Sarah's death by searching through public databases for even the most distant relatives of the murderer. Ultimately, they had to eliminate thousands of candidates before they struck it lucky. Experts concluded that there was a good chance the DNA sample from Sarah's clothing belonged to one of the two brothers. One was 33 years old and the other was 27 at the time of the murder. The older one proved to be a felon with a note with the criminal history. Since his DNA sample was in the FBI database and he had served time in prison for violent crimes, it was evident that he was not involved in Sarah's murder. If he had been, his DNA would have matched evidence from the 1990s regarding Patrick Nicholas, the younger brother. The police had him under suspicion for violent crimes, including crimes against minors. But that was before the criminal's DNA samples were entered into the database. Detectives set up a surveillance system for the man right away. He was 55 years old and lived in Wellington, a nearby town. After 2 days of the police observing everything he did, the chance finally arrived. After going to the laundry, Patrick went outside to smoke and threw his cigarette butt on the ground while he waited for his clothes to be washed. Without delay, a police officer placed it in an evidence bag and went back to his vehicle. The second time Patrick went outside to smoke, a red handkerchief fell out of his pocket. The man did not pick it up and returned to the laundry room. The police were happy to collect the second piece of evidence, in case the experts could not obtain a sample of DNA from the butt of the cigarette. But the specialists were able to take samples from each of these things with ease, and the following day they gave the detective the much-awaited update. The DNA of Patrick and the DNA discovered on Sarah's clothing in 1991 matched exactly. The man was taken into custody by the police after the judge promptly issued an arrest warrant for him. From the time investigators learned his name to the formal filing of murder charges, it all took 5 days. Many asked the very reasonable question, why was a man with such a criminal history not even considered a suspect for all those 28 years? After his biography was leaked to the media, Patrick Nicholas, then 19 years old, tried to assault a young woman after approaching her and getting into her car. The victim was able to get away, but not before having to jump into the river and swim a considerable distance to get away from the attacker safely. After serving 4 years in jail, Patrick was allowed to leave. In 1994, he attempted to abuse a young woman who was underage, which led to his next arrest by the police. Although he was arrested once more, no database had his DNA on file. That has a peculiar explanation. The article for which he was prosecuted was not difficult enough to obtain DNA, and the police never came across his name in 3 decades. Additionally, he was absent from all 4,000 leads that were gathered over time. It also revealed the reason why specialists in genetic genealogy were unable to link them to Robert Fuller. As it turned out, Patrick's biological grandfather was raised under the adopter family name after being adopted. One of the men who found Sarah's body when they were kids in 1991 declared right away that Patrick was the murderer. He acknowledged that the experience had left a lasting impression on him. When the body was found, he was just 12 years old and the murderer had seen his face. The witness had been living in constant fear Patrick would kill him for years, and he did not feel safe. Until Patrick's arrest. The trial for Patrick did not start until 2023. He maintained his innocence, and his attorney attempted to refute the primary piece of evidence, the DNA test. He believed that the fact that Patrick's sperm was found on the young woman's cloth did not establish his guilt, but this argument was rejected. The attorney also attempted to dispute the validity of the DNA analysis itself, but the experts ruled that these arguments were wholly unfounded. Ultimately, Patrick was determined to have committed first-degree murder without intending to kill. He was essentially given no chance of ever being released from prison when he was sentenced to 45 years and 8 months on May 25th. Patrick was unmoved at the pronouncement of the sentence. Sarah's relatives also addressed the judge, thanking everyone involved in the trial and the investigators for bringing the killer to justice after he had evaded justice for 28 years. Paula Ellera was born in Colombia in the late 1970s to her parents, Cesar and Olga Ellera. She had 2 older siblings, Julio and Alexandra. In June of 1990, Paula, along with her mother and 2 siblings, moved to East Harlem, New York City, in hopes of finding a better life. They lived on the 30th floor of an apartment building at 420 East 111th Street, where they stayed with Paula's uncle, Guillermo Ospina. Her father, Cesar, remained in Colombia, working as a taxi driver, and was saving money to eventually join them in New York. Upon their arrival in New York, Paula started attending junior high school 99. According to her sister, Alexandra, Paula excelled academically, focusing her spare time on studying English and mathematics. She had only a handful of friends, mostly classmates, and aspired to become a lawyer to help those in need. Her uncle Guillermo described her as highly intelligent and mature for her age, thinking beyond her years. He also noted that Paula was very happy in New York because of her love for the English language. She was a young girl with many plans for the future, her uncle Guillermo said. Everything appeared to be going smoothly for Paula and her family, until a heartbreaking event suddenly changed their lives. On the cold afternoon of January 24, 1991, Paula, who was just 13 years old at the time, left her school and made her way back to the familiar surroundings of her apartment building. At approximately 4:45 p.m., she arrived at the entrance of the building and used the intercom to call her apartment. Her mother, Olga, answered and let her in by pressing the button to unlock the lobby door. This ordinary interaction would be the final one Olga would share with her beloved daughter. With the door now open, Paula entered the lobby and stepped into an elevator, but tragically, she never made it to their 30th floor apartment. 10 minutes later, when Paula hadn't arrived home, her brother and uncle grew worried. They felt that something was amiss and decided to go look for her. As they hurried down to the lobby, they found it completely empty. They began searching the neighborhood desperately for Paula, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. 3 hours later, around 7:30 p.m., a man out for a walk with his dog made a chilling discovery. He spotted a lifeless figure lying on a walkway near the East River. The area was littered with drug-related items like vials, syringes, and used lighters. Tragically, what he found was Paula's slender body. She had passed away. The site where she was found was located about a half a mile to the south of the apartment building where she lived. When detectives arrived at the scene, they were faced with a deeply saddening sight. There were no clues to indicate who might have committed this crime. The only things they discovered on Paula's body were a new Kids on the Block watch on her wrist and a piece of chalk in her pocket. Paula's murder profoundly affected not only her family, but also the entire neighborhood. Her mother Olga was inconsolable, struggling to come to terms with the loss of her daughter. At Paula's school, both students and teachers were in shock. In the aftermath of this tragedy, teachers held meetings with students to provide support for those who were close to Paula, helping them cope with their grief. They also advised all students not to walk alone in the area for safety reasons. In response to the incident, reporters were not allowed to access the school, and the principal and district officials declined to speak with them. Detectives were left with numerous unanswered questions. They went from door to door in the 32-floor building, hoping to find witnesses who might have seen Paula in the area where her body was eventually discovered. Unfortunately, they couldn't locate anyone who had seen her there. Moreover, the detectives had no information about the appearance of the person responsible for this tragedy. It remained uncertain whether Paula was killed in the isolated spot filled with crack vials where her body was found or somewhere else. Through their investigation, the detectives managed to piece together some important details. They discovered that Paula regularly stayed at school after hours for a journalism workshop on Wednesdays and Thursdays. On the day of her tragic murder, she had been working on an article about her father, intending to send it to him as a Valentine's Day gift. The detectives also found out that on that fateful day, Paula left the school after the workshop at around 4 p.m. and walked north along First Avenue with a friend. They parted ways at 106th Street, with Paula continuing to her family's apartment building. During their inquiries, the detective learned that another teenager named Aaron Wofford had entered the same elevator as Paula. However, when they spoke with him, he claimed to have gotten off at the 19th floor while Paula continued upward. As a result, the detective shifted their focus away from him as a suspect. The autopsy revealed the full extent of the terrible ordeal Paula had endured. She had been violated, strangled, and stabbed 3 times near her heart. The medical examiner also noticed unusual elongated marks on her thighs. It was clear that Paula had bravely resisted an assault, and her attacker had forcefully separated her legs, causing bruises on their thighs that matched the shape of their fingers. The examiner also collected male hair from her body. This was stored as evidence. On February 2, 1991, Paula's body was laid to rest at St. Michael's Cemetery in East Elmhurst, Queens. For months later, after her tragic murder, Paula's family decided to relocate to Flushing, New York, and they received support from Victim Services, a private nonprofit organization that assists victims of violent crimes and their families. In Flushing, Olga sought solace through counseling at the Families of Homicide Victims program, also run by Victim Services. As the family continued to cope and heal, they held onto the hope of achieving justice for Paula. However, as this time passed, Paula's case gradually grew colder, and the quest for answers became increasingly challenging. The murder of a 13-year-old girl should have been a major news story in any city at any time. However, in the violence-ridden New York of 1991, this dreadful crime in East Harlem was largely unnoticed. Between 1990 and 1992, the city reported over 2,000 murders each year, with an average of 6 bodies discovered daily across the 5 boroughs of New York City. Unfortunately, most of these occurred in impoverished, predominantly minority neighborhoods such as East Harlem, the South Bronx, and East New York, Brooklyn. Regrettably, very few of these cases received significant attention from the media. Instead, the media often focused on more upscale crimes involving white, wealthy victims in picturesque locations. Without the pressure from the media or politicians, Paula's case became a low-priority homicide. Consequently, her murder remained unsolved and largely forgotten throughout much of the 1990s. By the mid-1990s, crime rates in New York City were on the decline. However, in the housing projects of East Harlem, a disturbing trend persisted. A series of seemingly unrelated incidents began to occur, all involving the assault and murder of young, attractive teenagers with large skin, regardless of whether they were black or Hispanic. In 1994, a 15-year-old girl became a victim when she was confronted by an attacker brandishing a knife. This case revealed a consistent pattern used by the assailant, which he would repeat multiple times over the next 4 years. He would approach the teenager from behind and guide her to an isolated location. There he would blindfold her using a piece of her own clothing, coerce her to undress, and then subject her to assault. Remarkably, the 15-year-old survivor was able to provide a description of her attacker. He was a well-groomed young man, with a muscular build, and he displayed in excess a sense of self-importance. Shockingly, he even told the victim that she should consider herself fortunate to be assaulted by someone as good-looking as himself. A few years later, on September 10, 1997, firefighters responded to a rooftop fire at the George Washington houses on East 104th Street. In the aftermath, they discovered the lifeless body of a woman who had suffered severe abuse, had been struck with a blunt object, and was burnt so badly that she was unrecognizable. This victim was later identified as 19-year-old Johias Castro, who had moved to New York from the Dominican Republic with her family. Johias, a young mother with a daughter, had been pursuing her studies in computer science at a community college in the Bronx. 7 months later, in April 1998, a 13-year-old girl was the next victim in the same neighborhood. Thankfully, this young victim managed to escape with her life. 2 months after that, on June 2, 1998, 17-year-old Rashida Washington met a tragic end. She was found in a 15th floor stairwell of an East 112th Street housing project. Having been robbed, assaulted, and strangled, her lifeless body, with its naked torso covered by a shirt, had been positioned in a seated stance against the wall. Similar to the earlier victims, Rashida, a fashion student who worked at a clothing boutique, was petite, weighing only 100 pounds. Tragically, she was murdered just 3 days after celebrating her 18th birthday. In that same year, during the fall, 2 more young teenagers fell victim to assaults in the same area. A 15-year-old was attacked on September 25, 1998, followed by a 14-year-old on November 16th. Thankfully, these 2 adolescents survived, likely because they didn't get a good look at the attacker before being blindfolded. Even as these similar cases continued to accumulate, the police did not publicly acknowledge the possibility of a serial murderer targeting teenage girls in East Harlem. However, due to the concerns raised by the parents of the victims, the police eventually decided to take prompt action. In the 1990s, there was a relatively small database of DNA samples on record because of widespread testing of convicted felons had not yet begun. However, a significant breakthrough had occurred in the autumn of 1998 concerning the East Harlem cases. New York police experts in forensics compared bodily fluid evidence from the Rashida Washington murder with evidence from 2 other similar cases in the neighborhood. These tests conclusively linked the same perpetrator to all 3 crimes. Finally, detectives had solid evidence confirming the existence of a serial criminal preying on teenagers in Harlem. In response, police leadership assembled a specialized task force comprising detectives with the sole mission of apprehending the suspect. The police took action by distributing a wanted poster that included a sketch of the serial attacker. This sketch was based on descriptions provided by the victims. Shortly after posting the flyer in East Harlem, a tipster who called in suggested that the detectives should closely investigate a 25-year-old man known as Ace, who resided on the 19th floor of the same building where Paula had lived. The police quickly identified Ace's real name as Aaron Key, and this name triggered a memory. The name Aaron had initially surfaced during Paula's murder investigation. Detectives recalled the teenager named Aaron Wofford, who had been seen entering the elevator at the same time as Paula and had claimed to have exited on the 19th floor. The distinctive first name, Aaron, had also reappeared in the investigation of Johias Castro's murder in 1997. Phone records showed that in the days leading up to her death, Johies had made numerous calls to a man named Aaron Key. When questioned by the police, Aaron explained that Johies had been a friend of his girlfriend, Jacqueline. He accounted for his numerous phone calls by stating that the 2 women had been planning a shopping trip on the day of Johi's murder. The police also interviewed Jacqueline, who confirmed Aaron's explanation. It was only later that the police realized that Aaron Wofford and Aaron Key were actually the same person. Wofford was his father's last name and Key was his mother's. This revelation connected Aaron Key to 2 out of the 3 victims in the suspected serial killer case. He was the last person known to have seen Paula alive, and there was a significant history of phone communication between him and Johias in the days leading up to her death. These connections can not only have been coincidence. detectives decided to dig deeper into Aaron's background. They found that he was an intelligent and reasonably well-spoken individual. He was born on September 18, 1973, and he had spent most of his childhood in East Harlem. During the time of Paula's disappearance in 1991, he was living with relatives in the same building as her. Aaron was known as a charming person with a knack for computers. He claimed to be involved in rap music production, although there was little evidence to support this claim. Physically, he stood just 5 feet 8 inches and he was fairly handsome. His criminal record showed only one arrest for robbery in 1990, and he had spent little or no time behind bars. However, neighbors had a different perspective on Aaron. They described him as having a troubling side. He had a habit of peering through the peepholes of women in his building, and he often wandered around with a portable video camera, attempting to capture inappropriate footage. At this stage, the police didn't have much substantial evidence against Aaron, but they understood the importance of a thorough investigation. They focused on the assailant involved in the September 1998 incident, who had left behind a black FUBU cap and a gray sweatshirt. The detectives decided to look closer into these clothing items for leads. Their efforts paid off when they found a laundry tag on one of the garments. This tag eventually led the police to a dry cleaner, located near Aaron's building. What made this discovery even more significant was that the client list at this droid cleaner included Aaron's mother, Cynthia. Every piece of information seemed to point to Aaron as a prime suspect, and law enforcement was increasingly convinced that testing his DNA would confirm his involvement in the crimes. However, there was a significant hurdle. Aaron had no DNA on record because mandatory DNA testing for accused felons in New York wouldn't begin until the year 2000. In the 1990s, obtaining a DNA sample was not as straightforward as bringing a suspect and asking for a swab. DNA tests were still seen as invasive procedures, and acquiring a sample required judicial authorization based on reasonable suspicion. Even though there was substantial circumstantial evidence pointing towards Iran's involvement, detectives were aware that the details like the elevator ride, phone calls, and the laundry tag alone wouldn't be enough to persuade a judge to order Aaron to provide a DNA sample. Consequently, the police had to resort to an alternative plan. Their initial approach involved tailing Aaron Key, hoping he would unknowingly leave behind a sample of his saliva, like through spitting or disposing of chewing gum. However, this tactic quickly proved to be unsuccessful. On February 8, 1999, detectives finally caught a break when Aaron was arrested for his involvement in the theft of a computer hard drive. Since there were no laws mandating DNA testing for arrested individuals in New York at that time, the police had to resort to a bit of trickery in an attempt to obtain a DNA sample. They devised a plan where a female detective disguised herself as a doctor. Wearing a white hospital garment, she approached Aaron and asked him to provide a saliva sample for what she described as a routine tuberculosis test. She handed him paperwork and hoped he would sign a release form. However, Aaron, being cautious, took the time to read the document. When he noticed a line mentioning DNA analysis, he refused to cooperate. He claimed that he was a practicing Jehovah's Witness and that his faith prohibited him from participating in any form of medical treatment. Aaron had figured out what the police were after, and he was determined not to give it to them. After finishing his meal that evening, he tore his paper cup into pieces and flushed them down the toilet. To further confuse investigators, he swapped his cup with that of a cellmate. However, the police were one step ahead. Shortly after Aaron's arrest, he had been in a shared holding cell with several other men. During their time there, attendants had provided them with cups of water. Detectives managed to locate these cups in a waste paper basket and sent them for DNA testing. Within just a couple of days, the results came back, confirming that a sample collected from the rim of one of the cups found in the police holding cell matched the DNA of the East Harlem criminal. By the time the DNA test results were ready on February 12, 1999, Aaron had already been released without bail, as he was only facing a misdemeanor charge related to computer theft. Meanwhile, the New York Police Department offered an $11,000 reward for any information that could lead to his arrest. Authorities soon discovered that Aaron had traveled to Brownsville, Brooklyn, and met up with his 16-year-old girlfriend named Angelique Stalin. Her parents believed that they were going on a Valentine's Day date. However, Instead of sticking to their plans, Aaron and Angelique boarded a bus headed for Florida from Newark, New Jersey. Detectives grew concerned that Angelique might be in danger, potentially facing the same fate as the previous victims. After Aaron arrived in South Florida, he made 2 phone calls to another girlfriend back in New York. By this time, news of his status as a suspected serial killer on the run had made headlines. The second girlfriend, aware of the situation, promptly contacted the police and provided a tip that Aaron was staying at the Miami Sun Hotel, located just 2 blocks from the beach, on Northeast 1st Avenue in downtown Miami. Responding to this tip, 2 New York detectives rushed to the hotel and began surveilling it. When they spotted Aaron and Angelique walking around inside, they called a Miami-Dade SWAT team for assistance. The SWAT team stormed the building and discovered Aaron and Angelique hiding under the bed on the hotel's 6th floor. And on February 19, 1999, Aaron was apprehended and placed in custody. When detectives attempted to interrogate Aaron about the East Harlem crimes, he remained silent and didn't provide any information. However, the police had a plan. They later observed and listened from behind a 2-way mirror as they allowed Angelique into the interview room. Aaron and Angelique believed they were having a private moment to say their goodbyes. During this conversation, Angelique pressed Aaron to explain why he had committed the crimes. Aaron's response was cryptic. He mentioned that he had bugged out and claimed to have had a sickness. After a lengthy 4-month legal battle, Aaron was eventually extradited to New York to face trial on 22 felony charges related to 4 assaults and the murders of Paula Hilera, Johias Castro, and Rashida Washington. DNA evidence connected Aaron to 6 out of the 7 cases. During the trial in the fall of 2000, prosecutors John Irwin and Richard Plansky presented a powerful case. With a barrage of testimonies and DNA evidence against Aaron, they called upon 130 prosecution witnesses, including 2 of Aaron's victims. Aaron himself insisted on being the first defense witness to take the stand. Over the course of 2 days of testimony, Aaron displayed a range of emotions, from giggling like a schoolgirl to crying like a baby. He also expressed his anger at being prosecuted. His monologue, which was largely uninterrupted by the judge, prosecutors, or his own attorneys, covered a wide range of topics, including pop culture, drugs, rap music, jail food, and his reflections on the criminal justice system. With many of his victims' family members present in the courtroom, Aaron moved a bizarre narrative to explain why he found himself facing charges of brutal serial violence against young women. He asserted that the police had conspired to frame him as a part of a cover-up orchestrated by a corrupt medical examiner who was involved in harvesting and selling human organs. He even claimed that his DNA had been manipulated in what he referred to as genetic shuffling. However, the jury did not buy into his elaborate story. On December 16, 2000, when the guilty verdict was delivered, the courtroom burst into cheers. As Aaron was later led past the crowd of grieving relatives, he directed a profane curse at them. During the sentencing a month later, in January 2001, family members of Aaron's victims had the opportunity to speak directly to him. Olga, Paula's mother, addressed him, expressing her wish that he would understand the torment of sleepless nights, loss of appetite, the inability to walk or breathe, and the absence of peace, all the while thinking about her daughter's suffering at the time of her death. Olga spoke of her enduring pain, having brought her daughter to the country in pursuit of the American dream. When it was Aaron's turn to speak at the sentencing hearing, he began to cry and said that he was sorry. In response to this, a male cousin of Johias Castro erupted in anger and attempted to leap over the barrier in an effort to attack Aaron. Following this, Justice Joan Sadalnik delivered the sentence. She imposed 3 life sentences on Aaron, each without the possibility of parole, for the 3 murders. Additionally, he received a 400-year sentence for 4 counts of abuse. Aaron was incarcerated in the Clinton Correctional Facility, located in Dannemora, New York. By the time Aaron was sentenced, lawmakers in New York and many other states had enacted laws requiring DNA testing for individuals arrested in connection with violent crimes. Since then, this testing has been expanded to encompass most felony arrests, spanning both violent and nonviolent offenses. Moreover, certain jurisdictions have initiated DNA testing for individuals arrested for misdemeanors. For Olga, the agony of losing Paula remains as raw as ever. She understands all too clearly that the anguish stemming from the sudden and senseless loss of a loved one doesn't fade with time, especially when so many unresolved questions linger. As we conclude this heart-wrenching journey through Paula's tragic story, her memory and that of the other victims lingers in our thoughts. Reflecting on Aaron's actions and consequences he faced, we are left with thought-provoking questions. What drives an individual like Aaron to commit crimes like this? And how can society identify and address the factors that lead to such behavior? On January 7, 1972, the life of 19-year-old Nancy Elaine Anderson came to a tragic end in her apartment located in the vibrant neighborhood of Waikiki, Hawaii. The discovery of her lifeless body revealed a horrifying scene. She had endured a staggering 63 brutal stab wounds, with 3 of them inflicting severe lacerations. Initially, authorities suspected the possibility of suicide, but the gravity of her injuries quickly dispelled that notion. Thus began an extensive and convoluted investigation that would span several decades until a significant breakthrough finally emerged in 2022. The captivating allure of Waikiki. Nestled in the heart of Honolulu, the capital city of Hawaii draws countless tourists seeking recreational activities and a blissful holiday experience. Its pristine white sand beaches captivate visitors from around the globe, while the tropical climate, enchanting landscapes, and sun-kissed shores create an ambience of perpetual vacation for the local residents. However, beyond its reputation as a paradise for vacationers, Waikiki became infamous for a chilling case that sent shockwaves through the nation in 1972. Nancy Elaine Anderson, born on November 10, 1952 to Merle Van Anderson and Thelma Bernice Brown Anderson, was known for her amiable nature and warm personality. She was raised in a large and loving household, being one of 10 siblings. Born in Bay City, Bay County, Michigan, she had a strong desire to experience the island life after graduating from John Glenn High School in 1970. The thrill and adventure of living on an island had always captivated her. Before starting college, she made the decision to pursue this lifelong dream. In October 1971, she relocated to Hawaii and settled into an apartment at 2222, a Lover Drive in Waikiki. She also secured a job at a McDonald's located in the Ala Moana Center. According to her roommate, Jody, Nancy was incredibly friendly and trusting of strangers. Her outgoing nature and amiable personality caused some concern among her friends, colleagues, and family. It was widely known that Nancy dated multiple men, which raised red flags for those close to the 19-year-old. However, at work, her manager, Petro Rapolio, remembered her as a dependable and friendly employee. Her co-worker, Julie Torres, believed that Nancy was not promiscuous, but simply too friendly. No one could have predicted that her friendly demeanor would lead to a tragic and merciless death. Nancy returned to her hometown in Michigan to celebrate Christmas and New Year's with her family. Unbeknownst to her, tragedy awaited her upon her return to Waikiki. It had only been 2 months since she had embarked on her dream life in Hawaii, but it all came to a devastating end on January 7, 1972, when she was brutally stabbed to death. On that fateful day, Jody Spooner, Nancy's roommate, arrived home from shopping at 2:30 p.m. to find 2 unfamiliar men attempting to sell silverware to Nancy. Jody joined Nancy to watch their demonstration, but neither of them made a purchase. After conversing with Nancy for about 10 minutes, Jody retired to her bedroom for a nap between 2:40 and 2:50 p.m. Despite their good terms and friendly relationship, Jody preferred to keep to herself as Nancy often invited random strangers into their home. Jody had always believed that Nancy was too trusting and had a careless attitude towards her safety. Jody vividly remembers that before she took a nap, all the doors to their apartment were securely closed and locked. As she drifted off to sleep, she could faintly hear the radio playing in Nancy's bedroom and the sound of running water from her bathroom. When Jody woke up around 5:15, she headed to the kitchen and still heard the continuous noise of running water coming from Nancy's bedroom, which now had its door slightly open. Curiosity led Jody to enter the room, only to discover her roommate lying on the floor, covered in blood. Assuming it was a suicide, Jody hurriedly sought help from her neighbors to call the police. The lifeless body of a 19-year-old girl from Michigan lay motionless in a pool of blood, leaving everyone puzzled about how her life had come to such a tragic end. On the evening of January 7, 1972, Officers Mitten DeLace and George Gibbons from the Hawaii Police Department received a distressing call at approximately 5:29 p.m. reporting a possible suicide at apartment 704, 2222, Aloha Drive, Coral Terrace Apartment, Honolulu. As the police entered the apartment, they immediately noticed a blood-stained blue and white towel near the entrance. Upon entering the bedroom, they discovered Nancy lying unresponsive on the floor. Traces of blood were also found on the bed and in the bathroom. The brutal death of Nancy left everyone horrified. An ambulance was called, but unfortunately, at around 6 p.m., a physician pronounced her dead. Interestingly, while Nancy Anderson was being violently slain in her small apartment, her roommate, Jody Spooner, who was still inside, heard nothing that would have awakened her from her nap. None of the neighbors witnessed or noticed anything out of the ordinary either. This case was truly perplexing. The police conducted an extensive search for clues, but unfortunately, there was very little evidence to work with. Detective George Cruz observed multiple puncture wounds on Nancy's sternum, chest, abdomen, and thighs. Another officer noticed that her blouse was torn near her right armpit, revealing her bra. The autopsy confirmed puncture wounds on her left forearm, lacerations on her upper left arm, and blood under her fingernails. Shockingly, the autopsy report revealed that Nancy had been stabbed 60 times with a paring or pen knife, resulting in 63 wounds, including 3 exit wounds. The cause of Nancy's death was determined to be hemorrhage from a stab wound to the heart. The murder weapon was estimated to be approximately 10 millimeters wide and 60 millimeters long, but it did not match any knives found in Nancy's apartment. The autopsy report did not indicate the presence of drugs or alcohol in her body, although spermatozoa were found, which could potentially be related to consensual sexual activity. The police relied on the evidence recovered from the crime scene, including a blood-stained bedspread, free towels, and 2 slippers to gather leads. They believed that the attack became so violent at one point that the assailant's hand slipped off the blade, resulting in a significant cut. The attacker then used a towel to wipe away excess blood. Additionally, the police suspected that the wound on Nancy's thumb may have been inflicted in self-defense. Not only was the identity of the killer unknown, but the motive behind the murder was also unclear. Nothing appeared to be missing from the house, ruling out robbery as a motive. Nancy's kind and friendly nature made it unlikely that she had any enemies. As the investigation progressed, it became increasingly challenging for the police to uncover new leads. However, they did have a few suspects, including the 2 salesmen, Parker Graham and Jeffrey Alward, who were the last individuals seen leaving Nancy's apartment. Consequently, they were brought in for questioning. The detailed account was provided on how they arranged a meeting with Nancy. The presentation commenced at approximately 1:30 or 1:45 p.m. However, Nancy and her roommate showed no interest in the products and were given a pie cutter before they left the premises without visiting any other location. Both Parker and Jeffrey willingly provided their fingerprints, but none of them matched the ones found at the crime scene. Their polygraph tests confirmed the accuracy of their initial statements. When this line of investigation proved fruitless, the police turned their attention to the information provided by Jody's boyfriend, Kim Weaver. According to him, Nancy would often invite strangers to her apartment and associate with peculiar-looking men. Although he didn't know their names, he had given them nicknames such as Frenchman, Reno, Nevada, Cowboy, and Dude from Detroit. The investigators thoroughly examined these individuals and their alibis. Reno, Nevada turned out to be William Menner, who had dated Nancy, but claimed their relationship never went beyond kissing. He stated that he had never visited her apartment and had no knowledge of who could be responsible for the murder. Stephanie Fraser, a resident of 2223 Ala Y Boulevard, which was the neighboring building to a lower drive, witnessed some commotion on the day of the murder. She observed a car in the upper-level parking lot where a Caucasian couple could be heard arguing. After 15 minutes, they exited the vehicle, but Stephanie couldn't determine whether they proceeded onto the street or entered the building. The male individual was described as having tan skin and being between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 10 inches tall. He was approximately 25 years old and had dark brown curly hair. On the other hand, the woman was believed to be in her 20s and had shoulder-length dirty blonde hair. When presented with multiple pictures of potential suspects, the witness identified Richard Hacker, a mutual friend of Jody and Kim, as the man she saw arguing in the car. However, the certainty was not absolute. Subsequently, during the police investigation, one of Nancy's colleagues, named Karen Sullivan, disclosed that Nancy had mentioned dating a member of the mafia in the past, but no substantial evidence could be found to verify this claim. In Nancy's purse, the police discovered a bank passbook from Bank of Hawaii indicating that she had opened an account just hours before her death on January 7th. Further questioning of Paula Meyer, the bank teller revealed that Nancy likely opened the account between 2:15 and 3 p.m. shortly after Paula returned from her lunch break. The police extensively interviewed neighbors, boyfriends, roommates, salesmen, property managers, colleagues, and family members, but none of the leads or suspects provided fruitful results. Consequently, the case eventually went cold. Despite this, the police department remained determined and did not give up on solving the murder of Nancy Anderson. Advancements in science and technology in recent years motivated them to delve deeper and seek new answers. Between 2001 and 2003, blood samples discovered in 1972 were utilized to create 3 DNA profiles, 2 belonging to males and 1 to a female. Every individual involved in the case underwent testing and was ruled out as a suspect once again. However, the fate of Nancy Anderson took a turn when the Honolulu police received a tip in December 2021, suggesting a potential connection between the murder and the 77-year-old man named Tula Chirila Jr. The Honolulu Police Department conducted a DNA test on the evidence collected from the crime scene and sought assistance from Parabon Nanolabs, a DNA technology company based in Virginia. Utilizing DNA phenotyping, genetic genealogists were able to generate predictions of the suspect's physical traits as they would have appeared at the age of 25. It was discovered that Chirila resided in Reno, Nevada in 2021, prompting the Reno Police Department to be notified of the significant development in the case. Despite weeks of surveillance, their covert attempts to obtain Chirila's DNA were unsuccessful. In March 2022, they reached out to Tula Chirila's biological son, John Chirila, for assistance in obtaining a DNA sample. On May 5, 2022, the forensic report confirmed that John Chirila's DNA sample was a match to the DNA found at the crime scene, establishing that Tula Chirila, John's father, was involved in the case. Tudor Chirila's DNA profile aligned with the initial profiles discovered in Nancy's bedroom, marking a significant breakthrough in the long-standing cold case of Nancy Anderson. According to genetic genealogy, the suspect would have been approximately 25 years old at the time of the crime. It turns out that Tudor, who was born on April 15, 1945, would have been 27 years old in 1972, when Nancy was murdered. During that time, he worked as a graduate assistant at the University of Hawaii and resided on Canal Street, which was just 3 miles away from Nancy's apartment. Following her tragic death, Tudor left Hawaii and successfully completed his law degree. He then went on to serve as the Deputy Attorney General in Nevada. Notably, Tudor is recognized as a long-term attorney in the Silver State, working under the esteemed Attorney General Richard H. Bryan in various regions, including Reno, Carson City, and Lake Tahoe. However, Tudor faced a setback in 1994 when he lost the election of the state Supreme Court of Nevada. It is worth mentioning that Tudor has been involved in several legal cases, primarily related to taxation or estate matters. Interestingly, the Nancy Anderson case is not the first instance where Tudor Chirila has been implicated. In 1971, he reported his car stolen and later filed a complaint stating that the contents of his car were missing upon its recovery. Additionally, in 1995, when Tudor was 50 years old, he faced a complaint accusing him of kidnapping, restraining, and attempting to assault his then-girlfriend. However, these charges were eventually dropped. Another noteworthy mention is that in 1998, Tudor's name was linked to the Mustang Ranch brothel owned by Joseph Confort, a prominent figure in Nevada's brothel industry. U.S. prosecutors identified Tudor as the former president of AGE Corp., which was allegedly a front for Joseph's illicit activities. They were suspected of engaging in a conspiracy to defraud the government. In 2022, justice was finally served for Nancy after a long 50 years. The first arrest in the case was made and Tudor Chirila was charged with a murder. On September 6, 2022, detectives executed a search warrant at Chirila's residence and obtained his DNA sample using a buccal swab. Merely 2 days later, Tudor made a suicide attempt, but fortunately he survived. The results of the DNA test allegedly linked Tula to Nancy Anderson's murder. Following this confirmation, a non-bailable arrest warrant was issued and Tula Chirila Jr. was finally taken into police custody for the fatal killing of Nancy. He was initially held at Washoe County Jail in Reno, Nevada, and later extradited to Honolulu. In Honolulu, he pleaded not guilty to the charge of second-degree murder. His bail has been set at $1 million. While further trials are pending in the case, the investigation remains active and ongoing. Despite the passage of 50 years, the Anderson family never lost hope, and the police department never forgot the brutal murder of the young 19-year-old Nancy Elaine Anderson. With the arrest of a confirmed suspect, justice for Nancy is now within reach. Thanks to advancements in technology and genetic genealogy, the identity of the killer, who had mercilessly stabbed her over 60 times, has finally been revealed. As for the possible motive behind the killing, it remains a question. Do you believe there could have been other individuals involved in the murder of Nancy Anderson? On September 12, 1988, Lawrence, Massachusetts was rocked to its core by a tragic event. The lifeless body of an 11-year-old girl named Melissa Tremblay was discovered brutally stabbed to death and abandoned on the train tracks near the Boston and Maine Railway Yard. This senseless act of violence left the community in a state of shock, anger, and profound sadness. The question on everyone's mind was, who could commit such a heinous act? The search for justice would span 35 years before the perpetrator was finally apprehended. Nestled along the picturesque banks of the Merrimack River, Lawrence is a vibrant and thriving city that seamlessly blends small-town charm with the excitement of a bustling metropolis. The heartbeat of the city is fueled by its diverse and passionate residents, whose unwavering pride and love for their community can be felt in every corner. As you stroll through the bustling streets of Lawrence, a palpable sense of history and heritage permeates the air, as if the very bricks and stones whisper tales of the past. Lawrence holds a significant place in American labor history, as it was here that the historic Bread and Roses strike of 1912 unfolded, marking a turning point in the fight for workers' rights and social justice. However, amidst this rich tapestry of history, tragedy struck in 1988. Melissa Tremblay, born in 1977 to her mother, Janet Tremblay in Ceylon, Massachusetts, fell victim to a horrific crime. Raised by her single mother, Janet Melissa, affectionately known as Missy, attended Lancaster School and was adored by her peers. Described as a carefree, fun-loving, and compassionate little girl, she had a wide circle of friends and always brought joy to those around her. Melissa's favorite playground was the Boston and Maine Railway Yard, where she would spend countless hours running and playing amidst the train tracks, while her mother visited friends at a nearby social club. Tragically, it was in this very place that her life was cut short, forever altering the lives of those who loved her. On September 11, 1988, accompanied her mother and her boyfriend to the La Salle Social Club in Lawrence, not far from the railway. While the adults stayed inside, Melissa went outside to play. The last sightings of her life were reported by a railroad employee and a pizza delivery driver who were in the vicinity during the late afternoon hours of that day. When Janet realized her daughter was missing, she frantically searched the area before reporting her disappearance to the police at around 9 p.m. that night. Janet returned home in a state of panic, desperately hoping for news of her daughter's safety. Tragically, she would never receive such news. On the morning of September 12, 1988, Melissa's lifeless body was discovered in the Old Boston and Maine Railway Yard in Lawrence. She had been brutally stabbed to death, and her leg was amputated post-mortem when a train ran over her body. Detectives theorized that the killer had intentionally mutilated the body in an attempt to remove any potential physical evidence. The state police and Lawrence police launched an extensive investigation into Melissa's murder, thoroughly searching the railroad yard and other locations, including the Lancaster Grammar School, where Melissa was a student. The community was shocked and devastated by the heinous crime that had occurred in their small town. Leading the case was Lawrence Police Officer Detective Thomas Murphy, who was appalled by the brutality of the murder. Determined to bring justice for Melissa, Detective Murphy and his team collected physical evidence from the crime scene and the victim's body, although the specific nature of this evidence was never disclosed. However, the forensic team analyzing the body did determine that the stab wounds indicated the killer was left-handed. Since no arrests were made at the time, it is presumed that the evidence collected was not viable for the investigation, leading to its shelving until forensic technology advanced enough to utilize it. The police interviewed numerous witnesses, suspects, and persons of interest, but the only lead they discovered was a suspicious-looking van in the vicinity of Melissa's location on the day of her murder. Unfortunately, further inquiries failed to yield any information about the van or its owner. Despite their exhaustive efforts, the police were unable to apprehend Melissa's killer, leaving the community in fear while her family and friends mourned their devastating loss. As time passed, no new leads emerged and the case remained unsolved, eventually growing cold. However, in 2014, authorities decided to re-examine the cold case, led by Lieutenant Peter Sherver. After reviewing the old case files and the evidence left behind from the initial investigation, the detectives knew they had to take action. Several years later, the evidence recovered from Melissa's body was submitted for testing, and in 2022, after 33 years, the detectives finally had a suspect. On April 26, 2022, Marvin McClendon Jr., a 74-year-old former Massachusetts corrections officer, was arrested in his home in Bremen, Alabama by the Alabama State Police for Melissa's murder. Although the specific details of the evidence used to establish his guilt were not disclosed to the public, the press release did mention that the evidence recovered from the body played a crucial role in identifying him as a suspect. As detectives delved deeper into McClendon's life, a series of incriminating details came to light. McClendon, a former employee of the Massachusetts Department of Corrections, was not working for the state in 1988. He had worked for the department on 3 separate occasions between 1970 and 2002. However, during the time of the murder, he was involved in carpentry work in Chelmsford, a locality near Lawrence. Investigators discovered that McClendon had several connections to Lawrence, the nearby town where the young girl's lifeless body was found near a set of train tracks. Their investigation revealed that McClendon frequented various locations within Lawrence, including the Seventh-day Adventist Church on Salem Street. Additionally, he owned a van that resembled the one witnesses saw Melissa near on the day she disappeared. These findings shed light on McClendon's proximity to the murder location, prompting further inquiry into his potential involvement in the crime. In 1988, McClendon, then 41 years old, had gained a reputation for having an uncontrollable temper and displaying violent and aggressive behavior when under the influence of alcohol. He was known to frequently visit strip clubs, engaging in inappropriate and disrespectful activities towards women. Furthermore, he was involved in sexual relations with women in the back of his van, further tarnishing his image. These facts were previously presented in a court hearing by his brother, Strasnick. Mr. McClendon was represented by a court-appointed attorney, Mr. Fasselt, during his trial following his arrest. However, during a hearing, a probation employee testified that Mr. McClendon did not meet the criteria for appointed counsel. During the hearing concerning Henry Fasselt's motion to dismiss, McClendon's defense attorney, his own brother Strasnick, presented arguments against the motion. He provided evidence countering Fasselt's claim that the DNA evidence collected was insufficient to support a first-degree murder indictment against McClendon. According to court documents, McClendon's lawyer highlighted that his client willingly provided a DNA sample to investigators during his initial interview with Lieutenant Peter Sherver of the Massachusetts State Police, which occurred in Alabama in 2021. Despite using a walker, McClendon managed to make his way into Salem Superior Court on Tuesday, where he sat beside his attorney, Fasold. In April 2022, during a subsequent interview conducted by authorities, McClendon vehemently denied any involvement in Melissa's tragic demise. He maintained his innocence and even suggested that he may have been the victim of a meticulously orchestrated plot by inmates from the Massachusetts Department of Corrections, where he had previously worked. This statement not only attempted to shift blame, but also aimed to mislead the authorities. Strasnick emphasized that the DNA evidence collected from the crime scene matched the DNA profile of a male relative of McClendon, making it highly unlikely that it belonged to anyone else. Furthermore, he argued that the DNA evidence was just one piece of the puzzle, as there were other factors supporting the indictment against his brother. McClendon's attempts to absolve himself of responsibility did not end there. He proceeded to shift blame onto his own brother, Strasnick, displaying a treacherous betrayal and a willingness to sacrifice anyone to protect himself. His efforts to portray his own relatives as the mastermind behind the crime revealed a great deal about his disloyalty and lack of trustworthiness. He vehemently disputed the notion that his brother was factually innocent, presenting evidence of McClendon's erratic behavior, leading up to and following the murder, arguing that these actions indicated guilt. Additionally, he highlighted McClendon's history environments, making him a plausible suspect in the murder case. Fasold's statement suggested that the investigation focused on McClendon rather than his family members due to specific evidence available at the time, such as McClendon's left-handedness, potential connections to Lawrence, ownership of a van in 1988, lifestyle and interactions with law enforcement during the investigation. However, this explanation seems suspicious, potentially serving as an effort to absolve Mr. McClendon of any wrongdoing and could be seen as a calculated and deceptive move. During the court proceedings, Judge Salim Tabit presided over a motion seeking to dismiss the case against the defendant, Mr. McClendon, who had been accused of first-degree murder. The judge attentively listened to the arguments presented in the motion and decided to carefully consider the matter before making a final decision. It is important to highlight that the charge of first-degree murder is an extremely serious offense, carrying the potential penalty of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Consequently, this case is being closely monitored by all parties involved, and the outcome of the upcoming hearing is expected to significantly impact the course of the trial. Despite Fasold's unsuccessful attempts to secure McClendon's release on a $50,000 bond, he remains detained without bond at Middleton Jail. Fasold also emphasized that there were no eyewitnesses to Tremblay's murder and no evidence suggesting that McClendon had any connection or motive to harm her. Nevertheless, McClendon is currently held in protective custody within a cell of Middleton Jail. As part of this confinement, he is only allowed to leave his cell when accompanied by a guard. This precautionary measure has been implemented to ensure McClendon's safety and the safety of others, considering the high-profile nature of the case and the potential risks associated with his involvement. By keeping him in protective custody, authorities can closely monitor his movements and interactions, thereby preventing any potential harm or disturbances within the jail or beyond. According to Sherry Carrickman, a friend of Melissa who attended McClendon's arraignment, she was merely 10 years old when the crime took place. When she saw the defendant in court, she perceived him differently from what she had imagined. Melissa's family spokesperson, Danielle Root, conveyed that McClendon was described as an elderly and fragile individual. Shocking me, Melissa's lifeless body was discovered in a train yard in Lawrence on September 12, 1988, a day after she was reported missing. The family never anticipated that it would take over 3 decades for someone to be apprehended and brought to trial for Melissa's murder. Nevertheless, despite the lengthy delay, the family remains optimistic that the district attorney's office will exhibit the same level of commitment as the detectives who tirelessly pursue the suspect, Marvin McClendon. According to a statement, Root stated that there had been a lot of emotion since the end of April when they were informed of the arrest, ranging from excitement to sadness to frustration and all over the place. They were thrilled to see the suspect in jail, but also very saddened that some of their family members, such as their aunt, grandfather, and others were not alive to witness him facing justice. The statement went on to express gratitude to the police for their ongoing efforts throughout the years and for the use of DNA technology that was not originally available to work the case. Root finished by saying that their family was looking forward to the case, moving forward to the grand jury for indictment, and then on to the Superior Court to finally see justice served. On June 13, 1967, Gretchen Eleanor Harrington was born to Harold Boyd Harrington and Ina Harrington. At the time, her father Harold worked as a minister at a Presbyterian church. In addition to her parents, Gretchen had two older sisters named Zoe and Harriet. Gretchen's family described her as a person who radiated kindness and had a sweet and gentle nature. By 1975, at the age of 8, Gretchen was attending second grade at Delaware County Christian School in Newtown Square. Everything appeared to be going well for Gretchen and her family until a tragic event disrupted their lives. On the morning of August 15, 1975, Gretchen left home to attend a summer Bible camp program. This camp had two locations. The first was Trinity Church Chapel Christian Reformed Church, where a man named David Zanstra served as a pastor. The second location was the Reformed Presbyterian Church, where Gretchen's father, Harold, was the pastor. The Bible camp activities took place in the morning at the first church, and afterwards, David would transport the children to the second church. The Harrington and Zanstra families were well acquainted with each other. They lived nearby, and both fathers worked as pastors, while both mothers played the traditional role of a pastor's wife. In fact, one of Zanstra's daughters was Gretchen's best friend. Gretchen's journey that day was unusual. Typically, she would be walking to the summer Bible camp program with her two sisters, 12-year-old Zoe and 11-year-old Harriet. It was their daily routine. However, on that particular day, their mother, Ina, had just given birth to a baby named Jessica and was bringing the newborn home. Zoe and Harriet chose to stay back and await their return. Despite this change in routine, Harold, Gretchen's father, encouraged her to go to the summer Bible camp program to maintain her perfect attendance record, and so Gretchen embarked on the walk alone as her father bid her farewell. It was just past 9 a.m. when she began her stroll up the hill towards Trinity, kept a watchful eye on her as she proceeded along Lawrence Road. Little did he know that once she was out of his sight, it would mark the last time he would ever see his daughter alive. In the 1970s, in a peaceful suburban place like Marple, it was entirely normal to see children walking alone on sunny summer days. The idea of danger didn't even cross people's minds. This was a time when kids really played until late in the evening. They roamed the streets, ventured into the woods, and even cooled off in Darby Creek, which flowed behind Gretchen's house without any worries. Children would walk to their friends' houses, blocks away without any aid of cell phones or GPS watches to keep them connected to their parents. Marple was simply an exceptionally safe place. That's precisely why many longtime Philadelphians chose to move there in the 1960s. Gretchen was supposed to be at Trinity Chapel Christian Reformed Church by 9:30 a.m., but she didn't arrive as scheduled. The first inkling that something was amiss came when Harold noticed her absence around 11 a.m. A group of Gretchen's friends had come to the front door of the residence looking for her. Worried and unable to locate Gretchen within the classes or nearby, Harold took immediate action. He phoned the Trinity Chapel Christian Reformed Church and spoke with Maggie Zanstra, David's wife, in an attempt to determine his daughter's whereabouts. However, he was told she hadn't been seen. Following this, the Marple Township Police Department was contacted by David, and Gretchen was formally reported as missing. Gretchen's disappearance sent shockwaves through Broomall and Marple Township. By the following day, August 16, 1975, an extensive search effort involving hundreds of people was underway to find her. This included volunteer firefighters in canine units who scoured both sides of the creek, fields, and wooded areas. A Pennsylvania State Police helicopter continuously scanned the area from above. However, on August 17, 1975, just 2 days after Gretchen went missing, the police had to call off the large-scale search operation because they had very little information to work with. The police chief, Daniel Hennessy, candidly admitted to a local newspaper that they had no clues regarding her whereabouts. This situation threw the entire town into a state of panic, shaking the community's sense of security to its core. In response, friends and family members started distributing flyers to passing motorists in the area. These flyers featured Gretchen's most recent school photo, showcasing her with a missing tooth and a cheerful childlike grin. The absence of information led to a surge in speculation and countless unanswered questions. Did she run away? Did she accidentally drown in the creek? Could a stranger have abducted her, or was it someone she knew? The mystery surrounding Gretchen's disappearance left everyone deeply concerned and bewildered. In the days that followed after Gretchen vanished, the police worked to gather information and understand the events surrounding her disappearance. One of their key interviews took place on August 19th when they spoke with David. During this conversation, David disclosed that he had indeed transported a group of children to the church on the day Gretchen disappeared. However, he stated that he had not seen her on that particular day. As August turned into September, Gretchen's sisters, Zoe and Harriet Harrington, resumed attending Delaware County Christian School. However, their fellow students found it difficult to approach them or engage in conversation. Unsure of what to say in the face of such a heart-wrenching situation. When traditional investigative methods yielded no results, the police decided to pursue an unconventional avenue in their search for Gretchen. They turned to the assistance of a psychic named Judith Richardson Hames. Judith was known for using her psychic abilities to aid law enforcement in solving nearly 100 criminal cases, particularly those involving missing children. In September 1975, Judith sat down with police officers and she made a prediction that she herself hoped would prove to be incorrect. According to her psychic insights, she believed that Gretchen was dead. A month later, on October 14, 1975, a jogger exploring Ridley Creek State Park stumbled upon a decaying body hidden in the forest. Initially unsure of what he had come across, his uncertainty vanished when he noticed a human fingernail. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the jogger promptly contacted the police. Gretchen's parents examined the distinctive clothing discovered with the remains, and they confirmed it was hers. Subsequently, the medical examiner matched the body to Gretchen using dental records. The tragic conclusion was that Gretchen's death had resulted from homicide. The forensic examination revealed that her skull had sustained multiple fractures, indicating a severe beating. Although the police initially suspected abuse, the autopsy did not yield any concrete evidence to support this hypothesis. On Sunday, October 19, 1975, just a few days after Gretchen's body was discovered, her father, Harold, stood at the pulpit and delivered a deeply emotional sermon. In his heart-wrenching address, he spoke of Gretchen's faith in Christ. He pointed out that she was now free from this world, but her murderer remained bound by their terrible actions. Gretchen's funeral was a somber event, and David officiated the service for the 8-year-old. Following the ceremony, she was laid to rest in Meridian Line Cemetery, situated in Johannesburg, Michigan, USA. Meanwhile, the discovery of Gretchen's body in the woods ignited renewed fervor for the investigation. Witnesses began to step forward, sharing accounts of various individuals they had seen in the vicinity where Gretchen's body was found. These eyewitness reports provided descriptions of men who had been in the area. As a result, the police received a flood of tips from the community, with some seeming more promising than others, while others turned out to be unrelated or unhelpful in the pursuit of justice. Investigators examined a range of potential suspects, even scrutinizing individuals with prior criminal records residing in the vicinity. Despite their efforts, no significant leads emerged, and the evidence box stored at Marple Township Police Department headquarters began to gather dust. This box contained a trove of materials, including reel-to-reel tape interviews, photographs, and memoranda, all relevant to the case, but the lack of progress had it sitting idle. As time passed, the investigation into Gretchen's disappearance grew cold, occasionally during roll call meetings, or when a detective had a spare moment in an otherwise uneventful week, they would revisit the case. They would look through the file, hoping to spot something they had missed before. But each time it seemed like a futile effort. The leads always led to dead ends, leaving them frustrated and without any breakthroughs in the case. For many decades, there were no developments in the case. The original detectives who had been working on Gretchen's disappearance had either passed away or retired. However, in the fall of 2022, there was a significant turn of events. A woman whose name was not released to the public reached out to the Marple Police Department, expressing her desire to discuss Gretchen's disappearance and murder. At the time, Nick Coffin, a sergeant, had taken charge of Gretchen's cold case. Therefore, when this woman contacted the Marple police, her message was directed to Coffin's phone. The woman informed Coffin that she believed she had information about who might have been responsible for Gretchen's tragic fate. She also mentioned an attempted kidnapping incident that had occurred around the same time, raising suspicions of a possible connection. This unexpected contact rekindled hope for solving the long-standing mystery surrounding Gretchen's disappearance and murder. On January 2, 2023, state troopers arranged an interview with the woman identified only by her initials, SF, denoting her as a confidential informant. This interview would prove to be a momentous breakthrough in a cold case that had remained unresolved for nearly 5 decades. According to SF, she had been a schoolmate of Gretchen and one of her sisters, Zoe. SF also disclosed to investigators that she had been friends with David Zanstra's daughters and frequently visited the Zanstra residence, even staying overnight on occasions. During one of these sleepovers, when she was 10 years old, SF recounted awakening in the middle of the night to find David inappropriately touching her. Frightened by this disturbing behavior, she shifted her position and prompted David to hastily exit the room. Shockingly, this inappropriate touching occurred again the following night. In the morning when the girls awoke, SF decided to confide in David's daughter about her father's unsettling actions. To her astonishment, the daughter responded with something along the lines of, "He does that sometimes." Over time, mustered the courage to share this distressing experience with her parents. Shortly after Gretchen's disappearance, the Zanstra family relocated to Plano, Texas, a suburb of Dallas, in response to the situation. During her interview, SF also shared with state police information about another child in their neighborhood, a girl named Holly, whom she considered a friend. According to her, someone had made an attempt to abduct Holly. As the conversation unfolded, SF presented the investigators with a diary she had kept during her childhood. In a specific diary entry dated September 15, 1975, she had written that a man had tried to kidnap Holly twice. In the diary, she went on to express her suspicion that this man, whom she referred to as Mr. Z, might be the one responsible for Gretchen's kidnapping. Mr. Z was her way of referring to David. This revelation from SF added a significant layer to the investigation into Gretchen's disappearance and murder. The interview with SF and her diary entry motivated investigators to locate 83-year-old David, who is now residing in Marietta, situated northwest of Atlanta, Georgia. On July 17, 2023, investigators conducted an interview with David at the Cobb County Police Headquarters in Marietta. This interview was carried out by 2 Pennsylvania troopers, Andrew Martin and Eugene Trey. The conversation started with a somewhat friendly tone. In the beginning, David initially denied having encountered Gretchen on the day she disappeared. However, the situation took a different turn when the police informed David about the allegations of assault made by a woman who had documented her experiences in the diary. As the conversation progressed, David eventually broke down and confessed to something profoundly disturbing. David recounted to the police that he had observed Gretchen walking towards the church that morning. He claimed that he offered her a ride in his green AMC Rambler station wagon, and she accepted as she had no reason to decline the offer. However, contrary to taking her to church as promised, David admitted to investigators that he drove Gretchen to a nearby wooded area. There he parked the car and instructed Gretchen to undress, but she refused. Following this, he struck Gretchen with his fist, resulting in her suffering head injuries and bleeding. David then admitted that, hearing Gretchen was dead, he tried to conceal her partially unclothed body with sticks before leaving the area. This shocking revelation left detectives stunned as they processed the horrifying details of what David had confessed to. In the wake of this shocking revelation, David was arrested and faced a slew of serious charges, including criminal homicide and first-degree murder as a result of his confession regarding Gretchen. While David's confession provided some closure concerning Gretchen's fate, it also raised a disconcerting question with ramifications that reached far and wide. Could this man, who had openly admitted to killing one girl and harming others, have additional victims? Before relocating to Marple, David had served as a pastor at a now-closed church in Flanders, New Jersey for several years. During his time at Trinity, he had been an outspoken advocate against the inclusion of education about sexuality in the local school district's curriculum. Less than a year after the discovery of Gretchen's remains, he moved his family to a church in Plano, Texas, just outside Dallas, where he led the congregation for 7 years. Following this, David's pastoral journey took him to the Living Faith Community Church in San Diego. His final pastoral assignment was in Fairfield, California, from which he retired in 2005 at the age of 65. Authorities were aware that this lengthy period of leadership provided him with considerable influence and access to young and vulnerable individuals. This left them with questions about the potential extent of his actions during these years. The Marble community had at long last received some of the answers it sought for decades, but the shocking turn of events did not bring peace to many residents. It had been far more comforting to believe that an outsider, a disturbed criminal, had committed this heinous act, a person who randomly entered the town, abducted a young girl, and then vanished as swiftly as they arrived. However, the perpetrator was not an outsider, but rather a respected member of their own community. It was a religious leader, a man with a wife and young daughters of his own. This further shattered the sense of security within the community. In the aftermath of all this, Gretchen's family issued a statement. In it, they expressed their gratitude to law enforcement officials for their ongoing dedication to the case. They also conveyed their hope that the individual responsible for Gretchen's tragic murder would be held accountable. Following David's arrest, his legal team initially contested an extradition process. However, prosecutors led by Delaware County District Attorney Jack Stolzheimer sought assistance from Governor Josh Shapiro's office to facilitate the return of the confessed perpetrator to Pennsylvania. David is presently under investigation for potential instances of abuse beyond this case. Additionally, investigators took a DNA sample from David, which could prove valuable in a broader context, aiding in the investigation of other missing persons, as well as cases involving assault and murder nationwide. As we conclude this harrowing case, one can't help but reflect on the complexities and twists that unfolded over the years. What challenges lie ahead of Gretchen's family as they seek closure and healing after all these years? And what about David, the perpetrator? What kind of justice do you think he should face for his actions? And how will his arrest impact other potential cases of abuse? If you have any comments or would like to suggest other cases you would like us to cover, please feel free to share your thoughts below. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.